right, looks like we're getting settled in. This talk has an option for you to follow and code along. So if you'd like to do that, you probably want to get your computer out. I'll go a little quickly. But welcome to last talk of the first day, Beginner's Guide to Kubernetes. So a little bit about myself. My name is Kim Schlesinger, and on nights and weekends, I am the co-founder of a company called Diversity. We're trying to make the tech industry more equitable by building a Glassdoor for diversity. We launched an app that has company profiles in September of this year, and we're building out more features. We also have a really great set of blog posts for companies looking to learn more about how to encourage diversity and inclusion, as well as from tech talent who are diverse people in the tech space. So check it out. We're also looking for someone with technical chops to come on and help us. So if you're interested in helping us build our app and help us grow the company, we would love to have you. Please talk with me after. So that's nights and weekends. During the day, I work at a company called ReactiveOps. ReactiveOps is a company, and we do Kubernetes consulting work. So companies hire us, we come in, we either take their infrastructure from wherever it is and move it onto the cloud and move it into Kubernetes, or build it from scratch. ReactiveOps is a fabulous company. I have really enjoyed working there. We are hiring mid and senior level developer or DevOps engineers, and the company is fully remote. So you can work from wherever you'd like as long as you're working time zones like Eastern time zone to Pacific time zone. So ReactiveOps is a relatively new gig for me. I've only been there for 4 months. And even though we do Kubernetes consulting, I would consider myself an advanced beginner in Kubernetes. But that's the reason why I'm giving this talk. 6 months ago, I was a web developer and instructor at Galvanize, and I kept hearing about Kubernetes, and I knew a little bit about containers, and I knew a little bit and had done a little work with Docker, but I just didn't know what Kubernetes was, what it did, or why it was so incredibly popular. So if that's how you feel about hearing that term and that technology, this is definitely the talk for you. But why is Kubernetes so popular among ops engineers and developers? So Kubernetes, it's Greek for someone at the helm or the captain of the ship, is a container orchestrator. And so if you're a company that deploys your apps through services or microservices, and you get a lot of users using your applications, Kubernetes is great because it can deploy all of those services. You don't have to think too hard about the networking or how they communicate. Kubernetes has all of these cool self-healing features where if something gets taken down, Kubernetes is looking and it can spin it back up. So you as the ops engineer don't get paged at night or during the weekend. It's also a technology that I see my colleagues, they just love using it. They love talking about it. They love working on it. It's an incredibly robust open source project that you can contribute to. And so ops, DevOps, developers really are in love with this technology. It originally started as a program called Borg at Google. It's what used to power Gmail and all of their humongous apps. And they've given the code base, which is now open source, to the Cloud Native Cloud Foundation. So it's open source and it's available for all of us. So that's a little bit as to why it's such a popular technology. So with that in mind, like just what is Kubernetes? What is the technology? Why is it so popular? This is a beginner's guide to Kubernetes. And so what I'm going to be doing during this talk is I'm going to be giving a demo of how to deploy a really simple Node.js application into Kubernetes. That'll take the majority of the time. After that, we'll talk about some case studies, some companies in the wild that have used Kubernetes and why they used it. And then I will take questions. So first thing we're going to do is the demo. If you would like to follow along, this is the repo. This is my personal GitHub account. It's Kim Schles. It's pinned to the front, but you want to grab this repo, Beginner's Guide to Kubernetes. And if you scroll down in the README, I have the steps that we're going to take and some of the commands that we're going to run. So if you want to do this at home when we're done tonight, you can do it then. All right, so the demo. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this application that I built, and we're going to deploy it to Kubernetes. And these are the technologies that I used. I used Node.js, Docker, the Docker Hub, and the Google Kubernetes engine. There's only one technology on here that you absolutely have to use if you're going to do this, and that's Docker. Created my Docker image. Node.js, the app that I built, you could build it with whatever language or framework you like. Docker Hub is a registry where you can push your Docker images and pull them down. It's sort of like GitHub, but for that technology. There are a lot of other popular registries like Quay. You can save those images in Google Cloud Storage or at Amazon S3 buckets. And then I chose Google Kubernetes Engine to show you how to spin up a cluster and deploy things into Kubernetes. The reason that I chose that is they have a nice user interface. It moves relatively quickly, and you can demo it in a talk like this. There are a lot of other places you can use Kubernetes. You could do it on Amazon Web Services. You could set it up using kops. DigitalOcean has a new Kubernetes offering that people have been playing with that sounds cool. But GKE is just the simplest tool for me in this talk. So here are the steps that I went through. The first thing I did was I built an app, and I'll show you that in just a second. The second thing that I did was I turned that app into a Docker image. And then the third thing I did was I pushed that image to a registry. And so there's good news. Instead of you watching me do all of that, it is already done. So what I'm going to show you today is I'm going to create a Kubernetes cluster in Google Cloud Engine. I'm going to deploy the app to the cluster. I'll then expose the app to the internet so that you could access it from an IP address. And then if we've got time, I'll show you some of that cool Kubernetes stuff. So I'm going to go a little bit out of order, and the reason is it takes time to spin up a cluster with Google Cloud Engine, or Google Kubernetes Engine. And so we're going to start setting that up. We're going to let it do its thing, and then we'll go back and look at the app. So if you're following along, this is the time that you want your computer out. So to set up something on GKE, you want to go to the Google Cloud Console. And I'm signed in with my Google account. I'm going to go to the console. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm either going to select a project that I've already created or create a brand new one. I'm going to create a brand new one for this. So that's another project that I have. So I'm going to click on New Project. And I'll make that bigger. I'm going to call it Develop Denver. And create. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you're following along with me? Okay, fair amount of people. Cool, so that project is created, and I want to make sure I've changed into that project. That's a prior project. And so now that I've got that project created, I want to find the Kubernetes engine. And this is one of those times where I'm going to let this spin. It takes a couple of minutes, and I'm going to go back and show you what I've already built. So if we look back at those steps. So step one, build an app. So let me show you what I have built. All right. So I have this app, Beginner's Guide to Kubernetes. Let's see, I'll look at the file structure. It is a node application. And if I look at the package.json, let's see. Simple start, if I run npm start, it's going to spin up a node server. So let's take a look at that. Npm start. Uh-oh, app crashed. Cannot find Module Express. I must not have npm installed. All right, going to download those dependencies and then run that again. Beautiful. npm start. All right, it says app is listening on localhost 8080. All right, there's my app. It's very simple. It's HTML, CSS served up with a node server. All right. So the second thing I did was I turned the app into a Docker image. I've already done this, but I'll just show you how that happens. You write something called a Docker file, which is here. You tell Docker what environment am I going to use, what's the working directory, where am I going to expose this application, and what is the command to actually start the application. So you might have gone to the Docker image, best practices in Docker image workshop this morning, but that's what my Docker image looks like. So I'm not going to show you now, but what I did was I took that image, or I ran that, and I made it a Docker image, and then I uploaded that to the Docker registry. So I've already done those three. So let's check back in with Kubernetes engine. Sometimes if you refresh the UI, you'll find that it's at a different place than it was actually showing you. All right, so in the Kubernetes engine, and now it's asking me to create a cluster. That's what I'm going to do. It's where all of the machines that are running my Kubernetes masters and nodes are. And let's see if I can pull this over. All right, so first thing is to name the cluster. So I will name that the develop cluster. And then it's asking me for location type. Am I going to do zonal or regional? I'm going to choose regional. I believe the zones are the actual specific data centers in each region. And I want, if one of those zones go down, I want things to still be available, so I'm going to pick regional. I'll stick with US Central 1. I'll stick with the version of GKE that they're recommending. And then the default number of nodes, I believe it's ×3, so you see there's 9 there. I don't need that many, so I'll just do 2. Use the default settings, and I will click create there. So once again, this is going to take a little bit of time to spin up. So let's go back here. All right, so we're working on number 1, which is create a Kubernetes cluster with Google Cloud Engine. Then we're going to deploy the app to a cluster, expose the app to the internet, and then add some cool Kubernetes things. And so I've done a lot of the Kubernetes tutorials, like spinning up a Hello World app, the many different versions of those. And a lot of those tutorials, you do everything via the command line. You put in all of the configuration, all the information about what you want to deploy to Kubernetes. But what I've done is in the app directory in my GitHub repo, I have laid out all of those things in YAML files. And so we'll just look through these while things are getting spun up. So the first thing that we're going to apply to Kubernetes is a namespace, and we'll see what that means in just a minute. But the YAML file isn't too complex. It's just a namespace, and the name of that namespace is develop K8s. The next thing that we'll do is the deployment. And so this is where you're telling Kubernetes, hey, here is the Docker image that I would like you to deploy. Here's the number of pods that I want to have at all times, the command to start it, and the resources that I want you to be tracking. After the deployment, we're going to deploy the service. In Kubernetes, when containers get deployed, they get put in pods. That's like the smallest unit of thing in Kubernetes. And pods get killed and restarted all of the time, and those IP addresses are there and then they're not. And so what a service does is it sits in front of the pods, and it has a stable IP address that you can always be sending those requests to, and then it can act as a load balancer, sending traffic to the different pods. And if one gets killed and one's getting spun up, it doesn't matter to us. Kubernetes handles all of that. So here's our service file. You can see it's type load balancer. And then the last thing that we'll play with is a horizontal pod autoscaler. And so if we start getting just a ton of traffic, this is how Kubernetes will say, okay, I need another pod, I need another pod, I need more things so I can accept this traffic. It'll also scale down when that traffic decreases. All right. All right, there it is. If you're following along, will you give me a thumbs up if you've got this screen where you have a button where you can click connect? All right, so we have our Kubernetes cluster ready to go. We have an app that we want to deploy in Kubernetes. And so what we're going to do is we're going to click connect here. And GKE gives us 2 options. They say, okay, I can give you a command line interface to interact with Kubernetes through our Cloud Shell. So that's a shell that runs in your browser. Or you configure this to work from your command line. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to use the Cloud Shell today. At work, I use my command line, my terminal. So if you're following along, let's use Cloud Shell. Let's not get stuck in trying to get it working on your machine. So you click run in Cloud Shell, and I believe it just gives you that command. And so it already tells you that command. You have to hit enter. Beautiful. So I see my username, Schlesinger at Cloud Shell, and I see that I'm in the right project, Develop Denver. And so the tool that you use to interact with Kubernetes, the API with your command line, is called kubectl. You can say it all sorts of different ways. That's what I'm going to call it. So kubectl, and I just want to see what's on here. So I'm going to say kubectl, get nodes. So these are all the actual machines that are going to be running my Kubernetes cluster. And then if we think back to one of the things that we're going to do, we're going to create a namespace. It's called Develop K8s. But the reason we're going to do that is that Kubernetes comes with a lot of namespaces that have things in it, and we don't want to deploy things into different namespaces. However, to see what those namespaces are, you say kubectl, get ns for namespace. So Kubernetes comes with the default namespace, the kube public namespace, and the kube system namespace. Kube system has a lot of things running in it that Kubernetes needs to run. I honestly don't know much about kube public or default, so that'd be something to research on your own. All right, so I keep saying we want to apply, we want to create the namespace. The way that we're going to do that is we're going to apply files from this repo, but we actually have to get this code into the Cloud Shell so I can interact with it. So I'm going to go to clone or download, and you need HTTPS for this to work smoothly. So I'm going to copy that. And I'll clear that. And I'm going to do git clone, and then grab that. So I've been practicing this. It's already got it. I'll remove it. And I'll do that again. Let's see. All right, and then if I look in here, I've got Beginner's Guide to Kubernetes. I'm going to change into that. And then if I look at the file structure, I've got my Docker file there, the app, the package.json, all that stuff. But really all I need are the files that are in the app directory. So I'm going to change into that. And look at that. Beautiful. So we've got those three namespaces, kube system, kube public, and default. We want our own namespace to work in, and so we're going to apply the namespace file. The way that you do that with kubectl is you say kubectl, apply the file, and I'm in the app directory, so namespace. And it says my namespace develop K8s was created, and so the way to check that is kubectl get namespaces. Hey, and you can see I've got default, develop K8s, all of that. So I created my new namespace. If I want to see if there's any pods in the namespace, you can say kubectl get pods, -n for namespace, and then the namespace name, develop K8s. So there's no pods in the develop K8s namespace, which is good. That's what I'm expecting. But let's look at, are there any pods in the kube system namespace? Oh, I spelled pods wrong. Oh, look at all of those pods. So all these things that come with Kubernetes, FluentD, Heapster, kubedns, kubeproxy, metric server. So that's why we're going to have our own namespace to separate things. So if you're following along and you can see the Q or the develop K8s namespace, give me a thumbs up. Looks good. All right, so we've created our own namespace. If you look through these files, and based on what I said earlier, what do you think I should apply next? So just think about it for a second, and then just turn and talk to your neighbor. What's going to be next? What are we going to apply to this cluster next? Yes, but what file does that live in? It does not live in the Docker file. Paul, I'll have you give the right answer. So I heard a really good thought, which was we want to deploy the Docker containers, which is correct. And then the next thing was, is that from the Docker file? It's actually not from the Docker file. Where is that, Paul? It's one of those 4 files. Yes. So the deployment is how you tell Kubernetes, this is how many pods I want, and I want you to build these containers from this image. So if you look on line 16, you can see that we're pulling the image that I built and pushed up to Docker Hub. It's kimschles/develop18. And so when I deploy this deployment, Kubernetes is going to say, great. I'm going to create a pod, and I'm going to make it a container, and I'm going to use the image that is in the Docker Hub here. And that image will give you the app that I showed you earlier, that Node.js app that says, hello, develop Denver. Beautiful. So let's go ahead and do that. So before I do this, I'm going to mess something up a lot, and you'll just have to forgive me, but I have to be very specific about what namespace I'm going to ask this deployment to go to. You can create shortcuts and use things to just drop into that namespace and stay there, but for the sake of this talk, which is relatively short, I decided not to do that. So we're going to have to do -n and then say develop K8s each time. So I want to apply the deployment file, tell Kubernetes these are the containers I want. Oops, I got to do kube control. The file, I'm in app, so I'm going to do deployment, but I want to say, hey, please put that in the namespace, develop K8s. So it says the develop app was created, and we can check that in 2 ways. So if we say kube control, let's get deployments, and give it the namespace, develop K8s. Oh, okay. So it says, hey, you have something called the develop app. You want one, you currently have one, it's up to date and 0 are available, it's 17 seconds old. And then if I actually want to see what the pod looks like in the namespace, I would say kube control, get pods, and then the namespace, develop K8s. So I have one pod here that is running. Sorry, every time I click, it gets a little bit smaller. So I have this one pod here, it's running, it's 41 seconds old, and it has the unique ID at the end of it, but it is that Docker image of that Node.js app that's pulling from the Docker registry. So we're talking about step 4, which is create a Kubernetes cluster with GKE. We went through a lot of steps. I'm curious who had an aha moment or realized something through talking with somebody next to them that you didn't have before. You can just raise your hand, and I'll repeat what you say. Derek.
Incorrect, but Kubernetes in relation to Docker is kind of a container within a container, is the way of thinking about it.
As a container within a container. I don't actually know. Andy is my colleague at ReactiveOps, so I'm going to defer to him.
Kubernetes is a way to manage it. Okay.
So Derek was like, is Kubernetes, does it involve containers inside containers? And actually, it is when you have many containers that need to be talking with one another, that maybe you need more of them all at the same time or less of them all at the same time. Kubernetes is the orchestrator, the captain of all of that. That's a good one. What's another one? What's another aha moment or like a realization that you had while chatting with your neighbor? I don't know what a pod is. Yeah, that's a good one. So in Kubernetes, the pod is like the smallest thing you can have. It's the atom of Kubernetes. And so in this case, one pod is one container with that app that's running that app. And so if I had 5 pods running that hello develop Denver app, I would have 5 instances of that. So that's a good segue. With the deployment, what we did was we created one pod with that app, or we also put it inside of a namespace. But now what we're going to do is we're going to expose this app to the internet. And so I did not edit this. This is the way to do it from the command line, but instead of doing it there, let's do it from the file. So if we head back into our Cloud Shell, I'm still in my app directory. And, it's the service. And so this is the thing I was talking about that's going to receive traffic from the internet and route it to the pod or pods. So let's just apply it and see what happens. So let me clear this. So just like the other commands, kubectl apply the file service. So it says the service develop app was created. We can check by saying kubectl get services from the namespace develop Kubernetes. Did I do something wrong? I did. I did what I said I would do. I did not tell Kubernetes which namespace to put that service in. So let me do that again. So I'm applying the service and I'm saying put it in the namespace develop K8s. Okay, so it says that was created again. Let's make sure that it's in the right namespace. Ah, beautiful. So the service, it says it's a load balancer. It tells me the cluster IP. It tells me the external IP. That's the important thing that we want to know so that we can access the app from our browser or from curl. And then the port, and it says the external IP is pending. We have to wait a little while for that to get connected, so just run that command a couple of times. Thumbs up if you're following along, you've got your service up and running. Aha, there we go. So it's saying the IP where I can access the app that's in that pod is here. No. So if I open a new tab, and when I go to that IP address, I've got the app there. So we deployed our app to Kubernetes. So go ahead, if you've got your computer out, you can go to that IP address or go to the one that you're doing. Don't go to mine. And then give me a thumbs up either when you're at my app or when you are able to connect with your application. All right, we got 1, got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Awesome. Now, you don't seem very excited, but it took me a long time to get to this point. I am very excited that this is working. I spent many hours yesterday not being able to expose this app to the internet. Cool. So if you're following along, you've deployed an application to Kubernetes. How cool is that? And if you aren't following along, you can watch the video later or go through the steps and do it on your own. So, yeah, let's move on. Let's add some cool Kubernetes stuff to what we've got. So what we're going to do is we are going to add a Horizontal Pod Autoscaler. And I like that name because I feel like it really describes what's going to happen. And so if we look at that configuration, HPA, so I'm saying, hey, Kubernetes, at the minimum, I want one version, I want one pod with that container running. At max, I want 30 of them running. And I want you to start spinning them up when my CPU usage is over 75%. And so what this is going to do is if you get a ton of traffic all at once, it's literally going to create a bunch of new pods to be able to handle those requests. And then as traffic goes down, it will go down. So if you work at a retail company and Black Friday is a big day for you, your engineers might be looking at this or thinking about this like, hey, we're going to need a lot more things available to make sure that our service is available. And so it's the Horizontal Pod Autoscaler where you're going to do that. So let's go back to the Cloud Shell. It's just like the others, kubectl apply HPA in the namespace, develop K8s. All right, it says my Horizontal Pod Autoscaler was created. Let's confirm. Get the HPA in the namespace, develop Kubernetes. All right, it says it's there. Cool. It's got some of the information, mins pods and max pods. And I'm going to look at my deployment to make sure I'm just running one pod. So kube control, get deployments, namespace, develop, K8s. All right. So here it's telling me I've got one pod. And so now we're going to try and test this and see if it's going to actually scale up when we give it a lot of traffic. So I'm going to ask Andy to help me, and I will try to do the same. So I'm going to use a load balancing tool called Apache Bench, where you can send a ton of requests all at once. You can kind of configure how many requests you're going to send out and how many concurrent per second are going to go out. Andy's using a tool called K6, which is another load balancing tool. And so this is something that I already have on my command line on my computer, but I've got the command at the bottom. If you want to try and load test my IP address, you are welcome to do that. So I've already done some configuration, but this is my Apache Bench command. So I'm saying send 30,000 requests, 100 per second to this IP address. So I'm going to run that from my actual command line here, and I just got to get my IP address. All right, so it's trying that. Andy, are you sending requests? All right, so let's look at the Cloud Shell, or actually we'll just look at the deployments. All right, should I be looking at the deployments or the HPA? All right, I'm gonna look at the HPA instead, so get HPA. All right, so see targets is 30% out of 75%, so we still need to send some more traffic there, still the same. Let's see if my load balancer, yeah, mine has not been working. Sent 902 requests. All right, we'll keep trying. So still 30%. This is the diciest thing for a live coding, so. All right, we'll try another minute. If not, we'll just talk through what it should be doing. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, you can use Kubernetes on almost all the cloud platforms. You could declare it the same way, or you'd use something like COPS with AWS. This one, as a advanced beginner, like this one is the easiest for me to interact with, and the one where the UI makes the most sense. All right, we'll give it a couple more tries. Doesn't look like it's working. But ideally what we would see is the percentage on the left go up when it would exceed 75%. Then Kubernetes would say, all right, I need another pod, I need another pod, I need another pod in order to handle all this traffic. And then as your traffic went down, it would prune the pods that aren't needed anymore. And so that's one of the cool features about Kubernetes. All right, gonna move on. So that's one of the cool Kubernetes things, something I asked about later, or I think earlier this week. I was applying a change to a customer's something. I was changing a version number of an image or something like that. And I said, why doesn't their app go down when I make this change? And the reason was rolling updates. And so when I applied the change, I said, okay, I want the Datadog version from this one to another one. That with rolling updates, Kubernetes just takes down one pod at a time and then adds the new pods and spins them up so that there's no disruption in service. You can also manually increase the number of pods that you have running. So like I said, if a big day for your company is coming up where you know you're going to get a lot of traffic, you can just say, hey, instead of running 5 pods, let's run 10 at this time. So that is it for the demo portion. Before we met, I built the app. I turned it into a Docker image. I pushed that image to the Docker Hub. While we've been here together, we created a Kubernetes cluster with Google Kubernetes Engine. We applied all of those files. We created a namespace. We created a deployment. We created a service in front of that deployment. We also created a horizontal pod autoscaler. Either that's not working or we weren't getting enough requests to actually make that work. And then we looked at, that was the cool Kubernetes stuff. So let's talk about case studies. So when is it a good idea for a company to use Kubernetes? And so the Kubernetes website has some awesome case studies on it. My favorite one is the Pokemon Go story. And so when Pokemon Go launched a couple of years ago, they built everything in Kubernetes. They had lots of services that needed to talk to one another, but they also knew that they were going to be handling a lot of traffic all at once, and they weren't sure how popular the game was going to be. If you read through the article on the Kubernetes website, it says they're like, okay, at maximum we're going to have 50 million requests in a minute, and it was 3 times that. But Kubernetes was able to handle, to grow, and to be able to accommodate all of those requests. So Pokemon Go is one of the stories of Kubernetes. The other is the New York Times. New York Times used to have all of their data centers on premises, and so people are actually dealing with real servers and handling all of that. And so I guess they're gradually moving to Kubernetes, but you can imagine that New York Times receives a lot of traffic and has a lot of stuff going on in the background. So to recap what you've seen today, like I said, I built the Node.js app, created a Docker image, pushed it up to the hub. We created the Kubernetes cluster, we deployed the app to the cluster, and we exposed the app to the internet. Tried some cool Kubernetes stuff. Didn't work this time, no problem. So if you are a person who's like, wow, this is really interesting, I would like to learn more about that. Here are some resources I would highly recommend to you. The first one is called Katacoda. It's sort of like the Google Cloud Shell in that you're interacting with a terminal in the browser, but you actually get to spin up and connect with Kubernetes clusters. You get to run the kube control commands, and they have all sorts of scenarios where you can learn different use cases for Kubernetes or trying different things, so highly recommended. Second resource I really recommend is a Pluralsight course called Getting Started with Kubernetes. You basically deploy a Hello World app, but the reason this particular tutorial sets itself apart is unlike the others where you're running the commands and passing in all the configuration through the command line, you create those YAML files that I showed you, and you're applying them through the files. The guy who built the course is also really funny, and it's very enjoyable. The course itself is only 2.5 hours long. I was able to finish the course within my free 10-day trial of Pluralsight, so can do that. Google has a Kubernetes comic. So if you're like me and you're relatively new in the tech industry, you don't actually sort of understand, I don't have any firsthand experience with working with servers that I'm physically racking, or even the way that DevOps was done prior to Kubernetes. And so if you sort of want a historical view of the last 5 years in which technology has changed a lot, this comic is really excellent. I would highly recommend it. And a plug for my company, ReactiveOps. On the GitHub page for ReactiveOps, we have a repo called K8's Workshop. It is a much more robust application than the one that I just showed you, but you could do the same sorts of steps and set up a backend that's accepting data as well as a more robust front end. There's also a video on YouTube called the K8's Workshop video. Again, it's similar to this, but the video itself is 2.5 hours long, so it's just a much more in-depth look at what Kubernetes can do, and it's a good walkthrough. Beautiful. Thank you for coming. My name is Kim Schlesinger. Come chat with me if you'd like. Like me.